Update 3. My dad locked my sister in her room for disrespecting the badge, then made her serve dinner to the cop who touched me. When I finally told him what Vance did, he didn't even look at me. He just said, "Vance is friendly like that. Stop being dramatic." I stayed silent. That was 4 months ago. Last night, he sat in the dark, flipping through her notebook for hours and didn't notice he was crying until Mom brought him tissues. He turned it over in his hands, studying it from every angle. Then he set it down gently and pushed it back to Raven. He told her to keep it safe, that he needed time to think, to figure out what to do. Raven nodded and tucked the camera into her pocket. Dad's phone buzzed again. This time, he turned it off completely. Mom suggested we all get some sleep, that things would be clearer in the morning, but nobody moved. We sat there in the dining room. 4 people who lived in the same house, but suddenly felt like strangers. The tea Mom had made earlier sat cold and untouched. Eventually, exhaustion won. Dad went to his study and closed the door. Mom drifted to their bedroom. Raven and I climbed the stairs together, still holding hands. At the top, she pulled me into another hug and whispered that everything would be okay. I wanted to believe her. In my room, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Every car that passed made me tense, wondering if it was Vance's patrol car. Every creak of the house made my heart race. Sleep felt impossible, but somehow I must have drifted off because suddenly sunlight was streaming through my curtains. The house was quiet when I went downstairs. Too quiet. Mom sat at the kitchen table with her coffee, staring at nothing. She startled when she saw me, then forced a smile and asked if I wanted breakfast. I shook my head and poured myself orange juice instead. Something feels off about how quickly Dad changed his mind after years of not believing Raven. Just seeing her holding a camera made him suddenly question everything. The way Vance kept texting Dad's phone right after leaving seems calculated, like he's trying to control the story before those photos get developed. Dad's study door was still closed. His car was gone from the driveway. Mom said he'd left early for work, that he had things to take care of. She didn't meet my eyes when she said it. I wondered what kind of things needed taking care of at 6 o'clock in the morning. Raven came down looking like she hadn't slept at all. Dark circles shadowed her eyes and her hair was tangled. She poured coffee and sat next to me, her shoulder touching mine. Mom watched us but didn't say anything. The 3 of us sat in silence as the morning stretched on. Around 10, Dad's car pulled back into the driveway. He came in through the back door, moving slowly like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His uniform was wrinkled and his badge was crooked. He looked at each of us in turn, then asked Raven and me to come to his study. Inside, he closed the door and leaned against it. The room smelled like coffee and old leather from his chair. Pictures of our family covered one wall. Happier times when we all still smiled in photos. Dad's eyes lingered on one of him and Raven at her middle school graduation. He told us he'd been to see Vance, that they'd had a conversation. Vance had denied everything, of course, called Raven troubled and said I was just confused. But Dad had seen something in his partner's eyes. A flicker of guilt maybe or fear. Dad explained that Vance had been his partner for 8 years. They'd saved each other's lives more than once. Trusted each other with everything. Or so Dad had thought. Now he didn't know what to believe. The evidence was circumstantial. The photos Raven took just showed Vance sitting next to me. But Dad couldn't ignore what we'd told him. Couldn't pretend anymore that Vance was just being friendly. Not after hearing about the picnic. Not after seeing the fear in my eyes. He'd failed Raven once. He wouldn't fail us again. The problem was proof. Without something concrete, it would be our word against Vance's. And Vance had friends in the department. Lots of them. If Dad went after him without solid evidence, it could destroy Dad's career, maybe even put our family in danger. Raven pulled out her notebook and showed Dad all the dates and times she'd documented. Every instance of Vance showing up where I was, every inappropriate comment or touch. Dad studied it carefully, his face growing darker with each page. When he finished reading, Dad set the notebook down and rubbed his eyes. He looked exhausted, defeated. He admitted he didn't know what to do, how to protect us without destroying everything he'd built, his career, his reputation, his friendships. That's when Mom knocked and came in without waiting for an answer. Her face was pale and she clutched her phone. She said Celeste's mom was in the hospital again, this time with a broken arm and cracked ribs. The doctors were asking questions about how it happened. Dad's head snapped up. He asked for details, but Mom didn't have many, just that a neighbor had called an ambulance after hearing screaming from the house, that Celeste was with her mom at the hospital, that Vance was nowhere to be found. Something shifted in Dad's face, a decision being made. He stood up and straightened his uniform, fixed his badge. He told Mom to pack bags for us, that we were going to stay with her sister for a few days. Mom started to protest, but Dad cut her off with a look. He turned to Raven and asked for the camera again. This time, she handed it over without hesitation. He pocketed it along with her notebook. Then he hugged us both, holding on longer than usual. When he pulled back, his eyes were hard with determination. After Dad left, Mom rushed around packing suitcases. She wouldn't tell us what was happening, just that Dad said we needed to go. Now Raven and I exchanged worried looks, but helped gather our things. Within an hour, we were loaded in Mom's car, heading to Aunt Margaret's house 2 towns over. The drive felt endless. Mom gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. She kept checking the rearview mirror like someone might be following us. Raven sat in the back with me, her arm around my shoulders. Nobody spoke. Aunt Margaret met us at the door, her face creased with concern. She ushered us inside and immediately started making tea, her default response to any crisis. Her house smelled like cinnamon and felt safe in a way our own home hadn't in weeks. We spent the rest of the day waiting. Mom paced. Aunt Margaret cooked enough food for an army. Raven and I sat on the couch, flipping through TV channels without really watching anything. Every time a phone rang, we all jumped. It was almost midnight when Dad finally called. Mom took the phone into the other room, but we could hear her gasps and occasional questions. When she came back, her face was unreadable. She said Dad was okay, but wouldn't be home tonight. Maybe not for a few days. The next morning, Aunt Margaret made pancakes and tried to pretend everything was normal, but the TV was on in the background, and we all saw when the local news mentioned an officer being suspended pending investigation. They didn't name names, but Mom's sharp intake of breath told us everything. Raven grabbed my hand under the table. I squeezed back, remembering all the times she'd protected me. All the times she'd stood up for truth, even when it cost her everything. Now, Dad was doing the same thing. Finally, we stayed at Aunt Margaret's for 3 days. 3 days of waiting and worrying and checking phones constantly. Mom barely slept. She'd drift around the house at all hours, making tea she didn't drink and straightening things that didn't need straightening. On the third night, Dad showed up at the door. He looked haggarded, but there was something different about him. A lightness, maybe, like a weight had been lifted. He hugged Mom first, then came to where Raven and I sat on the couch. He told us it was over, that Vance had been arrested. Not just suspended, but actually arrested. The camera photos combined with Celeste's mom's injuries had been enough to start a real investigation. And once they started looking, they found more. So much more. Other girls had come forward, girls from the neighborhood, girls whose parents had dismissed their complaints. Girls who'd been told they were being dramatic or misunderstanding friendly behavior. The investigation was expanding. Vance wouldn't be hurting anyone else. Dad's voice broke when he apologized to Raven for not believing her, for choosing his partner over his daughter, for making her apologize to her attacker. He said he'd never forgive himself for failing her when she needed him most. Raven stood up and hugged him. Really hugged him, not the stiff, obligatory embraces of recent years. I saw Dad's shoulders shake as he held her. Mom joined them, then pulled me in, too. We stood there in Aunt Margaret's living room, holding each other and crying. We went home the next day. The house felt different somehow, lighter, safer. Dad had taken time off work to be with us. He said there would be interviews and statements to give, court dates eventually, but we'd face it all together. That first night home, we actually ate dinner as a family. All 4 of us at the table talking and even laughing a little. Dad had made Raven's favorite lasagna. Mom opened windows to let fresh air in. It felt like our house was breathing again after holding its breath for so long. Celeste came over the next day. Her mom was still in the hospital but stable. They were staying with Celeste's grandmother now. She and Raven hugged for a long time. Both of them crying. I heard Celeste whisper, "Thank you," over and over. The investigation continued for weeks.